Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Southern Cross Drive podcast, where we discuss all things Two Oceans half marathon. We're really excited. We're 7 weeks out, so getting into the meat of it, getting closer to race day. And today we're discussing all things nutrition and all things you need to consider from a nutrition point of view as you are still training and as you're getting closer to race day. As always, I have your coach here with me today, Devlin Eden. Dev, how's things going?
Hey Sharon, yeah, good to be here. Getting, like you say, getting into the meat of it. So excited to really listen to a lot of the stories and see how people's training are coming along. So yeah, hopefully this all helps.
Yeah, getting excited. I always find when I'm 7 weeks out, you're like, oh, I'm 7 weeks out. And those 7 weeks just, they do tend to go quite quickly. So yeah, again, we're here to guide you through that process and to help you to not freak out about it. So to hold your hand, essentially. So Dev, 7 weeks out, where are we in our training? What should we still be focusing on in this phase at the moment?
Yeah, Sean. So this, as you said, the meat. So this really is kind of us getting close to the peak volumes of training. So we're still not quite at our peak yet, but we really are building some significant volume at the moment. So at this stage, you probably have got a couple of people that are saying they're feeling a little bit tired, they're feeling a little bit sluggish, and that. And while we don't want that to be the norm, it is normal, if that makes sense. So we do know that at this stage you should be expecting to have tender legs here and there, big training volumes at the moment. So yeah, it's kind of normal to be feeling tired, and don't worry, when that next recovery week comes around, you're going to be happy that it's there. So yeah, entering the big phase, the higher volumes, we should still be gradually building our long runs though. So we keep talking every week about the long runs. And I said we're not quite at the peak, at the longest of the runs just yet. So we're still doing the gradual build. So as I mentioned, just adding 10 to 15 minutes each week onto those longer runs. And what probably is happening at this stage is you could be looking at maybe increasing a little bit on your midweek easy runs as well. So if you do an hour run, for example, on a Thursday, you could be extending that run to an hour 5, hour 10, hour 15. The thing with that run is it generally is not going to exceed an hour and a half, because we'll still keep the long runs to the weekend. I say this because I'm talking kind of the structure and how our programs are written, for example. If you are someone who's restructured the week slightly, that you do your long run on a Thursday, that's also okay. But it means that the shorter, easier run later in the week, then still we'd kind of cap to like a 90 minutes. So it really is just overall the easy run component of the week. We just building the volume and really trying to almost disperse the load over. If you're running 4 days a week and 3 of those are easy runs, you're almost dispersing the load over those 3 easy runs, rather than a 45-minute run on a Thursday and then a 3 or 4 hour run on a Saturday, and then another short one. You know what I mean? So you kind of want to just disperse it a little bit more. So you are getting more running volume in, but you're also not smashing it all into one particular long run and then doing like really short runs around that.
And Deb, from a, you mentioned the 3 runs, and we've obviously got that extra run, the 4th run in. It's not an extra run; it's the 4th run in your plan. Yeah, perhaps some interval work or higher intensity work. I know you've spoken about that before. Is that something that we're focusing on in this phase as well?
Yeah, indeed. So sorry, that's something I should have mentioned. At that block or the phase that we're in now. So remember, if we go all the way back to the beginning of our podcast where we had said we're breaking it into 3-4 week cycles, this particular phase, we're focusing a little bit more on our speed endurance. So really our stamina. So how hard can you sustain an effort for a longer period of time is really what we're trying to achieve here. These generally, if you are at the stage where you're doing intervals, so again, I'm going to put that little asterisk disclaimer there that not everyone should be doing intervals, depending on the level of runner you are. But if you are doing intervals at this stage, they're generally going to be longer intervals. So we're talking like 2 minute, 3 minute, 4 minute type intervals. Faster runners, so runners who will run a sub 90 minute half marathon, for example, might be throwing in 1K type intervals as well. So these are generally something that's more of a tempo effort, still not maximal type of effort, but tempo type of effort, building speed endurance, building stamina, so that we can just train our bodies to be able to push a little bit harder for a little bit longer at a higher relative intensity.
Makes sense. And then it would be a miss for me and you not to talk about strength, because that's always what we talk about. So where and what should you be with your strength training at this phase?
Yeah, so it's, again, we kind of sound like that broken record. It's still not too late to start strength. So if you want to implement strength and you haven't been doing it, and you know you're feeling bad for not doing it, now's the time. Let's get cracking. Let's get into it. For those of you who have been doing strength and have been putting all the puzzle pieces together and have been nice and consistent with strength, at least for the last 4 to 5 weeks, now's the time to maybe start increasing the load in the strength classes slightly. So I'm not saying now you've been doing body weight stuff, now you should go to the gym and do these Olympic lifts. That's not what I'm referring to. But maybe slightly heavier weights, maybe slightly tougher resistance bands, couple more reps on those sets. So just a little bit more. It's kind of you taking that next step now. So the same with your running, as we're building volume and load, you're doing exactly the same thing here in the strength component. So, but I again want to just caution you, as long as you have been consistent and the technique is still always going to be sound, don't go and start getting under the squat rack there and packing it full of weight and thinking, cool, Dev said I can get heavier, and suddenly now your technique goes out the window. So small increments as well in terms of how we're progressing, but just make sure technique is always sound. Sorry, just while I'm also thinking of it, if I can just go back a point just to those intervals again, talking about the kind of intervals that we should be doing at this phase. One thing I forgot to mention is also how much you should be doing. So I know we keep talking, you mentioned sort of that one run of the week of the 4 is our interval session. That is also still going to be dependent, as I said, on the level of runner. So some of you who might be a sub 90 minute, for example, half marathon runner, you potentially, on the odd weeks, again, this won't be an every week thing, you could potentially start throwing in a second type of interval session or higher intensity session. And that session could be something like tempo intervals, so 3 1K intervals, for example, where earlier in the week you might have been doing 4-minute intervals or something, or steady state type of runs or fast finish type of runs. So something where there's a little bit more intensity into that, a bit more stamina building stuff. But again, that's going to be if you are a faster runner and have experience and been running for many years, rather than just everyone deciding to now suddenly throw in a second interval session. So I do just want to caution you around that. But yes, there is scope for that in certain plans as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Sorry, I actually meant to ask that. No worries. Thanks for that. And I think if you're following one of the Coach Perry training plans, Two Oceans training plans, all of this is thought out for you. You don't even have to really be thinking about it. So that's the bonus there. But let's get into the meat of, excuse the pun, the meat of what we want to discuss today. All things nutrition. That definitely wasn't planned. Deb, I'll get, and I know you get this question as well all the time. Like, I'm only running a half marathon. Is my nutrition so important? One, we want to get away from saying I'm only doing a half. You're still doing the half marathon. Own that and enjoy it. But is nutrition so important if you're doing a half marathon?
Yeah, Sean, 100%. And you and I have often done races and halves where we get to the finish line and we go, I cannot believe how few people were eating around us on the race. Now, regardless, so you say it's only a half marathon, regardless of whether or not you run a half marathon in 75 minutes or you run a half marathon in 3 hours, the fact of the matter is it's still a relative intensity and it's still a fair amount of time on your legs and effort. So you burning energy for an extended period of time. Nutrition is critical. I really cannot sort of stress that point enough. Now, obviously, the relative intensities come into it where if you are running a 90-minute half marathon, just because it's 90 minutes doesn't mean you shouldn't be eating in that entire 90 minutes. And the chances are you pushing yourself quite hard for that 90 minutes because you are a fast runner. It's a race effort. And yes, you should still be taking something in because you're burning through the fuel quite quickly. If you're a 3-hour runner, you're out there for 3 hours. So even if that is, let me rephrase that. Even if you're running a half marathon as an easy training run, and you spend 2.5 to 3 hours out there, you might be a 2-hour runner, but you're taking 2 hours 30 to do it because it's a training run. It's such a long period of time that you're not eating. I know you often use the term or sort of the analogy that when you're sitting at work during the day, you're getting hungry and you should still be eating through the day. The same applies here. When you're out there on the road for that amount of time, it really becomes absolutely critical that you are taking something in and fueling. The long runs, and I think we've mentioned this before, but the long runs is where you should be practicing this nutrition. And the nutrition, I want you to kind of see this as your training. So as much as you train your body to get fitter in your running, you need to train your gut to be able to handle the kind of nutrition and things that you might be eating and drinking on the day. So that's what the long runs are there for. And I would much rather you have a bad run today because you got something wrong with your nutrition or this didn't work for you particularly, than do that on race day because now you've tried something new. So this is the time to trial and error things. To give you an example, I did a race last weekend where I actually had a really, really terrible run. And it was because I was playing around with something new in my nutrition. I actually was trying to take on a little bit more, but I realized I probably wasn't drinking enough fluid at the same time around that. And it was really hot. So there are a couple of things that I know that I got wrong on the day, but it's a bad day in a training run than a bad day on race day. So that's something that's really important. I want you to, now's the time to be playing around with things and try different things, really do. So whether it's solid food or gels or whatever it is, now's the time to be playing around with that.
So, and that's perfect. I love this. So let's dive into exactly what we need to be taking. So you're saying play around, but what are we playing around with? What do we need for training and for race day?
Yeah, so I like to refer to your carbohydrates as your jet fuel. Okay, so a lot of people think, well, how many calories should I be taking in on a run, and how much of sugars or whatever I need to do. Your carbohydrates is what breaks down is the sugar. It's what we refer to as glycogen, and your muscles have a natural source of muscle glycogen. Okay. However, you've only got a certain amount of storage of muscle glycogen, and the harder you push or for the longer you push, the quicker you actually burn through that muscle glycogen. So as I say, your jet fuel is carbs, and we're generally guiding you to be looking at anywhere between 40 to 60 grams of carbs per hour or in a training run or on race day. Now, if you are new and you haven't really been doing the nutrition side of things really well, and this is something now you're going to only start playing with now, start on the lighter side. So even if you start with 30 grams of carbs per hour, start with that and just get an idea again how the gut handles it, how you feel, and then slowly increase the carbohydrate intake. Now, I talk about carbohydrates. I'm not saying 30 grams of bread because bread is a carb. I'm referring to the actual carb content. So to give you an example, the little race food fast bars, for example, if I'm not mistaken, one bar has got about 13.5 grams of carbs in it. Okay. I'm suggesting you getting in between 40 to 60 grams an hour. So to give you an idea, if that one bar has only got 13 grams, you need to be taking in a minimum of 2 bars, maybe 2.5 bars per hour. So now it does take a little bit of planning because you need to think about how am I carrying this? How easy is it for me to chew on a nougat type bar? So this is where the playing around with things comes in. So does bars work better for you? Do you prefer to take in gels? Your average gel sachet, for example, plays around anywhere between kind of 20 to 35 grams of carbs, depending on the brand. So now again, having to plan ahead and think, all right, how am I going to get in my 40 grams of carbs per hour? So there takes a little bit of planning around this, and this is why it's something to do now and think about now, so you're not thinking about it on race day. Obviously, relative intensity comes into play as well. So on race day, when you're pushing yourself a little bit harder for maybe a good time, it is also then important that you should actually be taking in a little bit more. We come back to that car analogy that you and I love to use. You got a fuel tank, your carbs, full tank of fuel. in your run, you're obviously depleting that tank, but the harder you push down on that accelerator, the more fuel you're burning. So the more fuel you need to be topping up more regularly. And what's really important when I talk about topping up the tank here, there's kind of two ideas of fueling. There's fueling for training and fueling in training. And those two are quite important, because I do get some people that struggle they run early in the morning, they struggle to eat before they go out on the run because it's way too early and I can't have a breakfast. That is okay, but you just need to think about, if that is the case, you've only eaten the night before. So while you haven't done any training or physical activity throughout the night necessarily, you still are burning. It's still brain function, body function that's burning a fuel source. So by the time you do start your run in the morning, you are at a slightly fasted state. So that's where fueling in training becomes really important. It's a case of then starting your gels, bars, whatever you use, that much earlier in a training session so that we top up that tank quite quickly. The fueling for training is what you do in and around your training session. So can you eat a breakfast before? Can you top that tank up before you get started? Immediately afterwards, between your training sessions, day to day as well, which is really important. That doesn't negate the fact that if you've eaten a breakfast in the morning, I'm not saying you shouldn't be eating anything during that training session. You should still be topping up the tank. You never want to get to a point where your glycogen stores dip so badly that you now, what we refer to, bonking or hitting the wall. And if any of you have had that experience, you'll know it's not a fun experience and you struggle to put one foot in front of the other and keep moving forward at any sort of intensity. So that's really where the fueling comes into it. Thinking about how much, thinking about the ease of carrying and consuming. So I talk about consuming, as I said, is it easy enough to chew on a bar? I know we've spoken before about things like white bread sandwiches. So white bread is really good because it gets into the blood sugar or into the blood system quite quickly, the carbs. But some people, I think you told me the story the other day about peanut butter sandwiches, and you thought, oh, I love a peanut butter sandwich until someone gave you one en route, and then you realize it's just sort of tacky mouth and you can never chew. So think about how easy it is to take that in and consume it when your mouth is dry, when you are tired later into an event as well. So play around with things that work for you, and this is the time that you should be experimenting with foods, with drinks, with bars, rather than waiting for race day with something new and then realizing this doesn't work for me, my stomach doesn't like it, and having a really terrible run.
Yeah, I love that. There's a lot of gems in there. Just a side note. I mean, I'm one of those people who struggles to eat in the morning. One, because I am not very good in the kitchen. Two, because I love my sleep. So I'd far rather have an extra 10 minutes sleep than get up earlier to eat something, which really isn't bad. But just as a tip, to mention, I think Nikki de Villiers, who's the dietitian on the Coach Perry team, she also helps out with some of the comrades stuff as well. She suggested that if you are someone like that, to at least just have 200 to 250 mils of a fruit juice. So you're getting a carb in the morning before your run, so that it then just sort of keeps you going, and you can then keep filling up from there, as you mentioned. But Dev, just to reiterate, and maybe just to make that a little bit clearer, how you mentioned we need 30 to 60 grams every hour. So how often I know that seems, I've just said every hour, but should you be having those 30 grams or 30 to 40 grams or 40 to 60 grams on the hour? How often should you be breaking that up, essentially?
Yeah, so it's something that I don't like to necessarily dump it all at the end. You really need to be taking things in. Again, remember, it takes time for whatever you're taking in to actually enter into the bloodstream. So now it will digest as well and then enter into the bloodstream. So now if you are taking something on the hour, for example, you've had an entire hour that hasn't done anything. You're now taking something in, and probably half an hour to 40 minutes later, that digestion and entering into the bloodstream is only happening. So now we've extended that to an hour and a half. So I generally like to constantly be sipping on something or constantly be taking in something, even if it's not. When I say constant, I'm not saying all day long run chewing on a bar. But if you break that down into sort of 15-minute cycles, for example, or every time you go through a water point, take 10 seconds through that water point to maybe slow down quickly eat half a bar and then carry on moving to the next water point. So those are the water points along the route really help. And that's a really good way for you to force yourself in, saying, all right, I've done enough of the running. This is a good place to maybe implement a walk break, and then come in and say, all right, let me force myself to eat something, drink something through the water point, and then keep moving on. And you don't have to dawdle. I'm not saying sit there and have a picnic with your chinas, but really just take something in, keep moving briskly through that. It forces you to get that in, and a little bit more regularly than on the hour.
Awesome. Guys, in a couple of weeks' time, we are going to discuss all things race day planning. And so we'll tap into a little bit of what you should be doing nutrition-wise on race day, breakfast and all the rest, and how to get to the start, blah, blah, blah. So be sure to stay tuned for that in a couple of weeks. Dev, before we move on to hydration, which I think is obviously very key as well, your thoughts on caffeine as a supplement or something to use during racing?
Yeah, so I mean, I love me a coffee, but in this instance, I'm not necessarily talking. We're not talking caffeine as like finding someone on the side of the road that's got a coffee station. We're talking about caffeine pills, caffeine shots, caffeine gels, those sort of things. Not opposed to it. It again is something I would recommend training and testing. So you have to try them out and see how you respond to caffeine. Now, again, the response to caffeine isn't how do you respond to a cup of coffee in the morning. That's what I'm referring to. How do you respond to taking caffeine when the body's under strain and you're training? So that's important. Practice with them. But caffeine generally has shown a slightly delayed onset of fatigue. That's probably not the right wording. But from a fatigue point of view, it does push that a little bit later. So taking in the caffeine in a gel form, that's still got the carbohydrates, but got a bit of a caffeine kick. It's something I'm not opposed to. Play around with it, and maybe something to be taking later into your run as well. So you've been fueling constantly, you've been feeling pretty good, but now you're going to give you something sort of in the latter half or maybe the latter third of the race that just gives you that little bit of an extra kick. It just kind of pushes that fatigue a little bit later into the run. It's also a stimulant, so it also does kind of keep you aware, and just when your mind's really clutching out and zoning out completely, can help with that as well. But yeah, you need to also just be someone that doesn't get the shakes on caffeine necessarily, and we don't want you running like you completely super hyped up at the same time. So play around with it. I'm not opposed to it, but yeah, see how it works for you and when and what timing works best for you.
Brilliant. Cool. Let's move on to hydration. So hydration, obviously, we're speaking particularly, water intake, and perhaps we'll touch on some electrolytes in a bit as well. But yeah, very often the thought process was, much like with carbs, you must take X amounts of carbs every hour. How does that work with hydration? What are some of the things we need to consider?
If you're over 50 and want to recover from sessions faster, run pain and injury-free, and improve your endurance, then be sure to join Lindsay and I for our upcoming Faster Beyond 50 Masterclass. In it, we'll show you how we helped a 70-year-old run a 47-minute, 18-second 10K, and how you can take those exact same principles and apply them in your training. Simply scan the QR code that's on screen right now, or click on the link in the description below to save your seat in the training now. We look forward to seeing you there.
Yeah, so sort of old school way of thinking, and it's not necessarily wrong, but sort of old school way of thinking was you need to take X amount every 15 minutes or every 20 minutes and take that in. Sort of the more recent research has kind of pointed us in the direction of actually drinking to thirst. So when the body is thirsty is usually a good sign for you to be drinking. Now, I know I'm going to get a lot of people go, yeah, but isn't when you're thirsty too late already? No, your body will tell you, and it's not when you parched and you're absolutely dying, you're going, oh, I've never had water. That's not what I'm talking to thirst. Your body cues you when it's time that you need to be taking something in. You also don't need to be taking in a whole 750 ml bottle of water, for example. You can be sipping on something when you are finding thirsty. It is also dependent on the environmental conditions. So the hotter it is, you're generally going to find yourself wanting to drink more. So that's important. And we'll touch on sweat and all that sort of stuff in a little bit. But the environmental conditions are going to play a role in how often you're drinking. The flip side to that, though, if it is a cold day or a cool day, I know a lot of people don't drink because they kind of feel, oh, it's not that hot. I'm all right and I can get pushing on. I'm not saying the flip side there that you shouldn't then be drinking. You then should be drinking and trying to maybe plan sort of drinking regular intervals then at least. But you obviously can get away with getting in a little bit less in cooler environments. So yes, drinking, we're talking in this instance, and I want to separate the two, hydration versus fueling. There is a difference here. So hydration, I'm talking about getting fluid into the body. Fueling is obviously getting the carbohydrates and the fuel into the body for energy. Hydration doesn't give you energy. It just helps with the function of your cellular properties in the body. So your body's largely made up of water, and for your cell function to be optimal, the muscle function to be optimal requires fluid and requires water. So it is important for you to be hydrating. How you hydrate on race day is something, again, you need to be practicing in your training at the moment. And race day, what's really nice about it, obviously, it takes a little bit of the thinking out because there are regular water points. So you can, if you are someone that doesn't mind running and picking up a cup at the water tables, you've then got regular access to that. However, if you are someone that needs to keep moving through, it's then ideal to maybe try a hydration pack if you're happy running with a hydration pack on, or you get those little collapsible flasks or collapsible bottles that once it is finished, you can squash up and put into a pocket for a later stage. The nice thing about Oceans is they have refill stations at their water tables. So they're obviously trying to mitigate waste in that. So this is a really good opportunity for you to take a few seconds break, eat something while you fill up that collapsible flask or your hydration pack as well. So that's generally encouraged, and I would recommend that. But I want to go back to the point of you have to train these things. So if you are running now and you think, okay, on race day, I love the idea of a hydration pack because now I can carry my own water. Please play around with it now because it's a new piece of equipment that you're running on. There could be chafe. There could be biomechanical changes because now you're running with a slightly different posture because your pack's pulling on your back, whatever it might be. So practice with those hydration packs and flasks and everything now. Again, this is what the long runs are there for, and figure out how it's going to work for you best. And then I also want to just kind of give an asterisk is always plan for the worst in this instance. There are times where we've done races that, especially if you're a runner who might be 2 hours plus, that you get to the water tables later into the race and some of the water tables might have run out of water. It doesn't always happen, but it can happen. It's one of those things that I like to just plan for the worst, making sure then that you have got, for example, a hydration pack or a soft flask, or you've taken 1 or 2 extra sachets on or cups on or something at the previous water table. So those are the kind of things to just think of along the way as well. All right.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And electrolytes, Dev, I mean, how important are those? I mean, I guess when I was growing up, it was always, you must replace your electrolytes. Is that something we need to consider as well?
Yeah, so electrolytes, I again want to differentiate here. Electrolytes are not fuel. Okay, so I get a lot of people that go, if I ask them, what was your fueling strategy on race day or on this run? They go, oh no, I had 3 rehydrates along the way. Your rehydrates are great because they're giving you electrolytes and minerals, but they're not giving you fuel. Okay, so you need to differentiate the two. You still should be getting in your gels or bars or whatever. Electrolytes are there to help the body absorb fluid. So if you are someone who does get rid of minerals quite a lot, so if you sweat, for example, and you find this white salty residue on your clothes, it's just an idea that you do sweat out a lot of minerals and salts, all right? Now, the electrolytes, when you're drinking water, if you drink water alone, our water very often is purified and so processed that we're getting rid of a lot of those minerals in the water that we drink. So what happens now is you take on a bottle of water, but you're sweating it out quite quickly. So nothing is really absorbing as well into the body. That's where the electrolytes come into play. The electrolytes help the water to attach and actually absorb into the body for, again, that cellular function. So I've got no problem. Those little effervescent tablets that you can pop into a water bottle. Sometimes you get nice ones that are flavorless, so they don't give you any sort of sticky and sweet sort of taste and aftertaste. Some people also just play around with putting a teaspoon or a pinch of salt into a water bottle as well. So that's the sodium getting in there is another way of doing it as well. Something to consider, especially if you are someone who does sweat a lot. And like I said, sweats out a little bit of a salty residue. It's quite important to then add some electrolytes in. But a reminder, that's not giving you energy and fuel for this training session.
I want to get to how you know you're someone who sweats a lot now in a second, in terms of how do you work that out. But maybe just as a tip again, what I do is if I'm taking in a juice which is a carb-based juice, I throw my rehydrate in there. It doesn't taste amazing, but at least getting that all in one go. So so Deb, how do you know if you're someone who sweats a lot? Like, is there a way to work that sweat rate out?
Yeah, Sean, if you're anything like me, you just can stand near me for 5 minutes and you'll realize I'm someone who sweats a lot. Finish a run and I'm absolutely drenched. That's the obvious telltale sign. But over a period of time, if the wind's blowing, you dry off and you don't necessarily know as well. So there are ways, and a really simple way of doing this is to weigh yourself before a run. Go out and do your run. So if you've run for an hour, for example, or let's say you run for 2 hours, weigh yourself again at the end of that run. It is important to note what you've taken in. So let's say you've been taking in fluid and hydration throughout that session, and you've taken, let's say, I'm going to kind of round this off just for simple mathematics here. But if you weigh 50 kgs at the beginning of your run and you weigh 48 kgs at the end of your run, you've lost 2 kgs. Keep in mind, you've put in an extra, let's say you've had a liter of water, so you've put in an extra kg. If my math is correct now, you've technically lost 3 kgs during that run. Keeping in mind, you've put in a kg that you've lost. So in that instance, it gives you an idea that in that 2-hour run, if you've lost 3 kgs, you divide it by 2, you can work out it's about 1.5 kg worth of or your sweat rate per hour. And it's usually that I would then say, okay, if I'm losing 1 kg or 1.5 kg per hour, I need to be at least replacing 1 liter to 1.5 liters per hour. So that just gives you an idea on how to plan your hydration as well around what your sweat rate is. People sweat at different rates. You'll get some people that almost don't sweat. It's not that no one sweats, but you'll get someone that sweats very little, and then you'll get someone like me who sweats a hell of a lot. And it really is important that you are hydrating for you and what your body's doing. And actually, there was a point on that I wanted to sort of note as well. And back to the salty residue. If you're someone who sweats a lot and then has a salty residue, it's then important to get enough fluid, but add some sort of electrolyte or salt to that as well.
Yeah, I know a couple of the Garmin's now measure sweat rates, and I'm always, I guess, quite cynical or skeptical when it comes to, Garmin, obviously, or not just Garmin, sorry, I'm a Garmin fan, but, these devices and how much they can tell us. And so a friend of mine was talking to me about it, and I was like, I didn't even know I've got a new Garmin. I didn't even know mine can do that. And I asked her just to, give me an idea of because she said, but my sweat rate is X. And I was like, okay, please do a little experiment for me. And of course, guys, this is anecdotal. This is N equals one person. It's not a scientific study, but she did exactly what Deb was saying. She weighed herself before she ran. She weighed herself after, and she noted what that was. And she noted what her Garmin then said. And just interestingly enough, it wasn't exactly the same, of course. But if she had mentioned quite a high sweat rate that she had weighed, Garmin also kind of indicates it's slightly higher. So, just a nice correlation. So I guess you could use that as an indication. Please, guys, don't swear that is by the law of what Garmin says, but or your device. But yeah, just a general indication. So if you don't like standing on the scale, which I don't, then maybe use your Garmin to help you out with that. So just as a nice little tip. Dev, so many nuggets in there, guys. As I mentioned, we will go into some other closer to race day nutrition and planning and prep and pacing and all the rest. So be sure to check that episode out in a few weeks. But Dev, 7 weeks out, as we're getting closer to race day, what are some of the things that we should consider now from a nutritional perspective? What can we be planning for that?
Look, I think important is to keep checking their website. So Two Oceans Half website. in terms of nutrition sponsors. So this is something I always like to advise people, especially if you're someone who might not have someone along the route to help you second, or you don't like carrying things with you. Have a look to see who the nutrition sponsors are. So I know in the past it's been Coca-Cola and Powerade, for example. So now play around, because you know they're going to have Powerade and Coca-Cola at the water tables. So now play around with that in your training. Go and grab a Powerade, run with a Powerade, taste it, sip on it, whatever. I can't tell you that they're going to have all your flavors. So that's going to be, the flavors are kind of irrelevant in this instance. Play around with Coke, play around with Powerade, see if that works for you, because then you know that on race day, that should you run out of your gels or something, at least the water points are going to have those that nutrition there, and you can take it on and know that you are quite comfortable using it. So check out if anything changes closer to the time, but keep checking out the website. So who the nutrition sponsors are, that's really critical. Plan your nutrition around the water tables as well. So like I say, whatever is there at the water tables, but also know that the water tables are usually set up every 3 kilometers on the route. Plan your nutrition that you can have a walk break, take it in at each of those water tables, or every second water table, depending on how fast you're running, and that as well. That's quite important. And then making sure that, okay, maybe I'm going to take in some water here, I'll take in some Powerade over there, and a bar in between somewhere along the line. So plan around with what the structure on race day is, and all this information you'll be able to find on their website. And then I think lastly, if you are lucky enough, and I say lucky enough because some people have partners or friends and that they travel with them, or if you're going down and you've got friends in the Cape that are willing to, but if you can have someone that's seconding you along the route, always helps. So it just takes a bit of pressure of you having to carry all your nutrition. It does, again, take quite a bit of planning, because you need to plan where en route you're going to meet that person, and also make sure that you're not making those meeting points too soon where there might be traffic and that person can't get to the next point. But because that also throws your race out when you start panicking and realizing, oh, hang on, my person was supposed to be there, now it's not, and now what do I do? So again, I always come back to that plan for the worst. But yeah, if you're lucky enough to have someone helping you out with seconding, it just takes a bit of pressure of you carrying all your nutrition, and they can meet you along the route with a cold bottle, for example, or a fresh sandwich, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, it's also just nice to see a friendly face when you're in the hurt box every now and then. So yeah, Dev, absolute value. Thank you so much for this, guys. If you got value out of this, I encourage you to send it onto your running groups, WhatsApp groups, send it on to your friends who perhaps are running. Yeah, you really don't know the impacts it can make for someone. Yeah, when you send it on, we experienced that the other day, so that was really cool. So yeah, Dev, thank you so much for your time. Huge amounts of value in here, guys, and yeah, looking forward to seeing you again next week for some more as we get closer to race day. Thanks so much, team. Bye.
Cheers, everyone.